Have you ever noticed how owning a home in America was sold as the finish line? Once you crossed it, the race was supposed to slow down. But lately, that promise feels thinner. In neighborhoods that still look calm and familiar, a quiet pressure keeps building. Year after year, like water rising behind a dam no one is watching. Property taxes were meant to be background noise, something you paid and forgot. Now they feel more like a meter that never stops running, ticking higher while everything else stays the same. For many homeowners, especially those on fixed incomes, the American dream is starting to feel less like a solid foundation and more like standing on a moving walkway that won't let you step off. Across the country, this slow squeeze is spilling beyond individual households. In some states, it is turning into a pressure point that hollows out neighborhoods and sparks a growing backlash over the cost of simply staying put. Welcome to Tax Hack Pro. Today, we are investigating the 10 states where property taxes are pushing homeowners to the brink and sparking a quiet revolt. Number 1, New Jersey. New Jersey was never supposed to be a cautionary tale. It sold itself as the sensible choice, close enough to New York and Philadelphia to matter, far enough to feel suburban and safe, tree-lined streets, good schools, a place where buying a home wasn't about chasing the next big win, but about planting roots and staying put. For decades, that promise held, and then the bills kept coming. In New Jersey, property taxes don't arrive like a shock. They arrive like gravity, quiet, relentless. You don't notice it the first year or the second. But somewhere along the way, the number on the bill stops feeling routine and starts feeling personal. It isn't a surprise spike. It is the realization that the meter never resets. Like a taxi ride where the driver never pulls over, no matter how long you have been sitting in the backseat. Walk through certain towns now, and you can feel the shift, even if nothing looks wrong at first glance. Houses are still standing. Lawns are still trimmed, but conversations have changed. Neighbors don't talk about renovations anymore. They talk about timing, about whether it is smarter to sell this year or next, about how long they can hold on before the math stops working. This is how places empty out in New Jersey, not with boarded-up windows overnight, but with quiet exits that add up. New Jersey consistently carries the highest property tax burden in the country. For many homeowners, especially retirees and longtime residents on fixed incomes, that means paying close to 5 figures every single year just for the right to stay. Not to upgrade, not to expand, just to remain where they are. It is the kind of cost that turns ownership into something that feels suspiciously like renting, except the landlord is the state and the lease never ends. The real revolt doesn't look like protests on the courthouse steps. It looks like kitchen table math. It looks like people delaying retirement because selling the house is the only way to stop the bleeding. It looks like adult children urging parents to move south, not for sunshine, but for survival. And slowly, the consequences show up in the community itself. Local shops lose regulars. Volunteer groups shrink. School districts watch enrollment soften, not because families disappeared overnight, but because fewer people are staying long enough to age in place. There is a bitter irony to New Jersey's situation. The better the town, the higher the tax bill. The more desirable the community, the harder it becomes to actually live there long term. What was once sold as stability starts to feel like a treadmill set just a little too fast. You can keep up for a while, but you can't step off without falling. This is how a state begins to hollow out without ever making national headlines. People don't flee all at once. They leave in waves timed to tax reassessments, retirement dates, and breaking points no one sees until it is too late. The streets don't go empty. They just lose the people who built them. And the ones who remain start to feel like they are holding the line alone. New Jersey's property tax revolt isn't about anger. It is about fatigue, about a growing sense that no matter how responsible you were, how long you stayed, how much you contributed, the cost of belonging keeps rising. For many, the dream wasn't getting rich. It was staying. And when staying becomes the hardest option, something fundamental breaks. If a state as established and densely settled as New Jersey can start to feel this fragile under the weight of its own taxes, it raises a question that doesn't stop at the Garden State's borders. If this is what stable looks like now, which state is really next? Number 2, Illinois. Have you ever wondered how a place can look busy on the surface and still feel like it is quietly emptying out underneath? Illinois is starting to answer that question in real time. Streets still fill during rush hour, houses still sell, but behind the scenes, a slow bleed is underway. Driven not by layoffs or disasters, but by a tax bill that keeps rewriting people's plans. In Illinois, property taxes don't just rise, they shift. When downtown offices lose value and commercial buildings struggle, the burden doesn't disappear. It moves, and it lands squarely on homeowners. In places like Cook County, many residents have seen property tax bills jump sharply in a single reassessment cycle, sometimes by double digits. not because their homes suddenly improved, but because the math had to land somewhere. For families on fixed incomes, that jump doesn't feel like policy. It feels like punishment. Walk through certain neighborhoods on Chicago's south and west sides, and you will notice something subtle. Houses are still there, but turnover is constant. Longtime owners sell, new owners stay briefly. For sale, signs linger a little longer each year. This is how a modern ghost town forms. Not with abandoned blocks, but with communities that can't hold on to people long enough to build roots. The emotional toll is harder to measure than the tax rate. Retirees who plan to age in place now run the same calculation every year. Pay the bill or cash out and leave. Younger families stretch to buy, only to realize the monthly payment is just the beginning. The real cost shows up later, unpredictable and rising, like a crack in the foundation you didn't see during the inspection. In Illinois, owning a home increasingly feels like signing up for a variable rate future where stability is promised but never guaranteed. There is a bitter irony here. Illinois needs residents to stay to stabilize its tax base. Yet the system keeps nudging them out. People don't announce their departure with protests. They do it quietly, one sale at a time. The result is neighborhoods that lose continuity, schools that struggle with enrollment swings, and local businesses that can't rely on familiar faces year after year. The lights stay on, but the sense of permanence fades. This is the revolt no one planned, not loud enough to dominate headlines, but strong enough to reshape entire cities. Illinois isn't becoming a ghost town overnight. It is becoming something more unsettling, a place where staying feels like the risk and leaving starts to look like the safer bet. And once that mindset takes hold, it spreads faster than any tax increase ever could. Number 3, Texas. How did a state famous for low taxes turn into one of the loudest battlegrounds over property taxes in America? Texas wasn't supposed to be part of this story. For years, it sold a simple bargain: no state income tax, plenty of land, and the promise that owning a home would stay affordable as long as you worked hard and played by the rules. But lately, that bargain feels like fine print no one reads closely enough. The problem in Texas isn't that property taxes are the highest in the country. It is that they move fast, and they move with the market. As home values exploded after 2020, tax bills followed right behind. In many counties, homeowners saw assessments jump by double digits in just a few years, not because their houses changed, but because demand did. Texas relies heavily on property taxes to fund schools and local services. So when values rise, the system doesn't absorb the shock. It passes it straight through to the people living there. Drive through the suburbs outside Austin, Dallas, or Houston, and you can feel the tension. New developments keep popping up, but longtime residents talk about leaving. Retirees who bought modest homes decades ago now sit on properties that look valuable on paper, while their monthly budgets tell a different story. The tax bill arrives like a second mortgage, one that never gets paid off. For people on fixed incomes, that isn't growth, it is pressure. Texas lawmakers didn't miss the warning signs. In 2023, voters approved a major property tax relief package, raising the homestead exemption for school taxes to $140,000, one of the largest increases in state history. That vote was more than a policy tweak. It was an admission that the system had started to push too hard. When a state built on a low-tax identity rushes to cut taxes, it is because the backlash is no longer theoretical. It is political survival. Still, relief doesn't erase the underlying fear. Exemptions help, but they don't stop assessments from rising. They slow the treadmill, they don't turn it off. Homeowners know this, and it shows in how communities change. Families cash out and move farther away. Older residents downsize or leave the state altogether. Neighborhoods don't empty overnight, but they lose continuity. The faces change faster. The sense of permanence fades. Texas isn't becoming a ghost town in the traditional sense. The population is still growing. Construction is still booming, but there is a quieter transformation happening underneath. In some places, the people who built the community can no longer afford to stay in it. And when that happens in a state as large and fast-moving as Texas, the question isn't whether growth will continue. It is who that growth is really for, and who gets priced out while everything still looks prosperous from the outside. Number 4, New York. How did one of the wealthiest states in America turn owning a home into a legal puzzle people are desperate to escape? New York's problem isn't just that property taxes are high. It is that they are confusing, uneven, and increasingly impossible to predict. In a state where certainty used to be part of the appeal, homeowners are discovering that stability now depends on which side of a municipal line they happen to live on. New York sits near the top nationally for property tax burden when taxes are measured against home values, especially outside Manhattan. On Long Island and in parts of Westchester, Annual property tax bills in the five-figure range are not unusual for many homeowners, particularly retirees on fixed incomes. That bill feels less like a civic contribution and more like a toll booth placed in front of their own driveway. You can stay, but only if you keep paying more each year. What makes New York different is how uneven the system feels. Two similar homes on the same street can carry dramatically different tax bills depending on when they were assessed or how their value was calculated. That frustration has spilled into courtrooms. In recent years, judges have allowed major challenges to New York City's property tax system to move forward, citing concerns that it unfairly burdens some homeowners more than others. When a tax system starts facing legal scrutiny, it is a sign that the pressure has gone beyond kitchen table complaints. Walk through older suburbs on Long Island or upstate cities like Buffalo and Syracuse, and you can sense the quiet shift. Longtime residents sell earlier than planned. Younger families hesitate to buy, knowing the monthly mortgage is only part of the cost. Homes don't sit abandoned, but turnover accelerates. Neighborhoods lose continuity. Schools feel the churn. Local businesses notice that familiar faces don't stick around the way they used to. The irony is sharp. New York relies on homeowners to anchor its communities. Yet the tax structure keeps destabilizing them. The better the school district, the higher the tax bill. The safer the neighborhood, the steeper the cost of staying. What was once marketed as permanence now feels like a variable rate agreement where the rules can change without warning. New York isn't turning into ghost towns overnight. The buildings are still there. The lights are still on. But the people who gave these places their character are quietly thinning out, replaced by short-term residents or constant turnover. That kind of hollowing doesn't make headlines, but it changes a state just as deeply. And when even New York, with all its wealth and influence, can't offer homeowners a clear, predictable path to staying put, it raises an uncomfortable question. If stability can crack here in one of America's most established states, how fragile is the idea of home everywhere else? Number 5. Florida. Florida was once seen as a place to finally breathe. After a lifetime of working, many people came here with a simple idea in mind: warm weather, no state income tax, and a lighter way of living. Once you owned a home in Florida, it felt like the biggest financial worries were behind you. But over the past few years, that sense of relief has been quietly slipping away. At first glance, Florida doesn't look like a state with a tax problem. Property taxes here aren't especially high compared to many other places. That is why so many people are caught off guard. The pressure doesn't come from a single bill, but from how the costs start stacking up. Rising home values push taxes higher. Then insurance kicks in, especially in hurricane and flood-prone areas, jumping so sharply that homeowners sometimes reread the statement just to be sure it is real. For people living on Social Security or a fixed pension, a few thousand extra dollars a year isn't abstract. That is groceries, that is medication, that is peace of mind. Drive through retirement communities around Tampa, Fort Myers, or South Florida, and everything still looks fine. But sit down and talk for a while, and you hear a different story. People aren't discussing travel plans anymore. They are talking about escrow shortages, insurance notices, and how long they can realistically afford to stay. Some have lived there for over a decade and are now thinking about selling for the first time. Not because they want change, but because they are afraid they won't be able to keep up. Florida does offer homestead protections, and some recent adjustments have been tied to inflation. For many homeowners, though, that only slows the pressure slightly. When insurance premiums double or even triple, a tax increase that is not that big suddenly feels impossible to absorb. The fallout happens quietly. Retirees sell earlier than planned. Some move farther inland. Others leave Florida altogether, even though they never imagined doing so. Neighborhoods don't empty out, but faces change more often. The sense of long-term belonging starts to fade. Florida isn't a ghost town, not yet, but it is becoming a place where staying is no longer a given. And when a state once seen as a safe haven for retirement makes people hesitate every time they open a bill, the real question isn't why people came here in the first place, but how many will eventually be forced to leave. Number 6, Connecticut. How does a quiet New England town start to feel unfamiliar without anything visibly falling apart? In Connecticut, the answer often arrives in a reassessment notice. Not with sirens, not with headlines, but with a letter that calmly explains your home is suddenly worth far more than it was yesterday, and so is your tax bill. Connecticut regularly ranks among the states with the highest property tax burden in the country, and the pressure shows up most sharply after revaluations. In several towns over the past few years, assessed home values jumped by 40% or more in a single cycle. On paper, that looks like prosperity. In real life, it feels like the ground shifting under your feet. The house didn't change, the neighborhood didn't improve overnight, but the cost of staying just did. Walk through older communities outside Hartford or New Haven, and you will hear the same quiet recalculations. Longtime homeowners sit at kitchen tables trying to figure out how a fixed income is supposed to stretch another thousand or two each year. Retirees who plan to age in place start talking about one more winter, or maybe downsizing, even when downsizing doesn't actually save much. Younger families hesitate to buy, knowing the mortgage is only the first commitment. The hollowing effect doesn't look dramatic, it is subtle. Local shops lose regulars, volunteer boards scramble to fill seats. School enrollments wobble as families move sooner than expected. Connecticut towns don't empty out overnight, but they lose continuity. The people who knew everyone slowly disappear, replaced by turnover and short stays. There is an irony here that cuts deep. Connecticut prides itself on stability, good schools, and tight-knit communities. Yet the better a town performs on those fronts, the higher the tax bill tends to climb. Stability becomes expensive. Familiar streets start to feel conditional. Number 7, Colorado. Colorado was supposed to feel balanced. Not cheap but fair. Not flashy but livable. For years, people moved here believing they could build a life that stayed predictable. Lately, that predictability has started to crack, and it is showing up in one place homeowners can't ignore: the tax notice. Colorado doesn't top the charts for property taxes, but that is not what is fueling the tension. The pressure comes from speed. Home values surged after 2020, especially along the Front Range, and property taxes followed. In some counties, reassessments pushed bills sharply higher in a single cycle, forcing homeowners to absorb increases they never budgeted for. When your income moves slowly but your costs jump overnight, even a moderate tax becomes destabilizing. What makes Colorado different is how quickly frustration turned political. Voters didn't just complain, they showed up. Ballot measures aimed at limiting tax growth and forcing relief debates gained traction, not because people wanted lower taxes at any cost, but because they wanted the rules to stop changing under their feet. When homeowners start treating tax policy like a survival issue, the social contract is already strained. You can feel the shift in mountain towns and suburban corridors alike. Longtime residents talk about cashing out. New buyers hesitate. Communities don't disappear, but they churn. Faces rotate faster. Roots don't go as deep. Colorado isn't collapsing, but when stability becomes something you have to vote to defend, it raises a quiet, unsettling question. How long can a place feel like home if staying requires constant resistance? Number 8, Michigan. What happens when the system that was supposed to protect you slowly stops doing its job, and no one notices until it is too late? For years, Michigan homeowners were told they were shielded. There was a cap, a limit, a built-in promise that property taxes couldn't run away from them. On paper, that sounded like security. In real life, it is starting to feel like a slow leak. Michigan's problem isn't a sudden shock that makes headlines. It is the quiet stacking of increases over time. Each year, taxable values rise just enough to seem manageable, until one day they aren't. For retirees and longtime residents living on fixed incomes, the math stops working. The bill keeps inching higher while everything else stays frozen. Protection turns into erosion, gradual but relentless. In older neighborhoods, the impact shows up in small, telling ways. People put off fixing the roof. They delay doctor visits. Savings meant for emergencies get tapped just to stay current. Selling the house becomes the unspoken backup plan, not because they want a fresh start, but because staying no longer feels sustainable. When holding on requires constant trade-offs, the idea of home starts to lose its comfort. Michigan isn't emptying out overnight. The houses are still lived in. The streets still look familiar, but stability is thinning. Loyalty no longer guarantees safety. And when even a capped system quietly pushes people toward the exit, the question isn't whether Michigan has a tax problem. It is how many people will realize it only after their options are already gone. Number 9, Kansas. What happens when a place that was never supposed to be expensive quietly becomes unaffordable anyway? Kansas doesn't fit the usual picture of a tax crisis. No coastal hype, no overheated real estate market, just modest homes, steady lives, and the belief that if you kept things simple, you would be safe. That belief is starting to crack. The danger in Kansas isn't dramatic spikes. It is the slow squeeze that feels almost embarrassing to complain about until it isn't. Property taxes rise bit by bit, year after year, while wages and fixed incomes barely move. For many homeowners, especially older residents, the bill doesn't arrive like an emergency. It arrives like a reminder that the margin they used to have is gone. One unexpected expense, one medical bill, and the math stops working. Drive through small towns and mid-sized cities, and you won't see abandonment. What you will see is hesitation. Homes passed down for generations quietly listed, repairs postponed, people talking about moving closer to family, not because they want to, but because staying no longer feels responsible. When affordability disappears in a place built on affordability, the loss cuts deeper. Number 10, Iowa. If Iowa was supposed to be the place where ordinary people could always afford to stay, why are so many quietly running out of room now? This is a state built on modest expectations. No booming tech hubs, no luxury markets, just the belief that if you lived within your means, you would be fine. That belief is starting to fail people. In Iowa, property taxes don't feel dramatic, and that is exactly the problem. They rise steadily while incomes don't. For many homeowners, especially retirees and farmers who have owned their homes for decades, the tax bill has become one of the largest expenses they face. Not the mortgage, not groceries, the tax. When your income is fixed and your land keeps being reassessed upward, staying put starts to feel like falling behind. Iowa isn't collapsing, but it is thinning in a way that cuts deep. When even a state built on affordability starts forcing people to choose between holding on and staying solvent, the question becomes unavoidable. If Iowa isn't safe anymore, what place really is? Across these 10 states, the pattern is hard to ignore. This isn't about politics, and it isn't just about taxes on paper. It is about what happens when staying in your own home slowly turns into a financial gamble, even for people who did everything they were told was right. Neighborhoods don't disappear overnight, but they hollow out when longtime residents are quietly pushed to leave. If this story feels uncomfortably familiar, you aren't alone, and you aren't imagining it. Like and subscribe to Tax Hack Pro for clear, grounded conversations about what is really happening behind the headlines. And share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Most importantly, tell us in the comments which state you live in, because this conversation doesn't end here, and your experience matters more than any statistic. Thank you for taking the time to watch the video until the end. If you found this content helpful, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss our daily video updates. Now, feel free to explore other exciting videos currently shown on your screen.